So let's begin. Today's daf is Nun Gimel, and we're on Nun base, Amid base. Today's daf is Nun base, and we're on Nun Aleph, Amid base. Rushing ahead. And the Mishnah had said various things that we're not supposed to do because of machlokas, because of the minhag of the makom, the minhag of the place, that we should maintain the minhag. Amalei Rav Safra Rav Abba. Rav Safra said to Rabbi Abba, Kagana none. We live in a place that we actually get the information of when Rosh Chodesh is. Today we have a calendar that tells us exactly when Rosh Chodesh is, but in its original intent and the way the Torah meant it, the way to establish Rosh Chodesh is by pronouncement from the Beis Din in Yerushalayim, and so there would be messengers that were sent out, either fires on top of hilltops or messengers that would go out and tell all the communities that Rosh Chodesh was pronounced on the 29th day or on the 30th day from the previous Rosh Chodesh, and then they would know when each month was, and when Sukkot is, and when Pesach is, and when Shavuos is, truthfully, when Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are. So all this required the Beis Din. So people that lived close to Yerushalayim, close to where the pronouncement was made, had a greater chance of being informed of when Rosh Chodesh was going to be, whereas people that lived further could not know when Rosh Chodesh is, and so the question is, if somebody lives in an area where they would be informed of Rosh Chodesh, and since they were informed of Rosh Chodesh, they would know in the exact day, and they wouldn't have to keep 2 days of Yom Tov. We today keep 2 days because the established because there is no pronouncement of Beis Din, so we don't have the proper way of establishing Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tov. So the way we establish it is really a set calendar, which is not the way it's supposed to be done, and therefore we don't have actually a Rosh Chodesh set by Sanhedrin and by Beis Din the way it's supposed to be. And so we keep 2 days of Yom Tov the way it was in the time of when they did have a proper Beis Din, when nobody in the places that nobody could figure it out would get the information. So that's how how we keep it. So we have 2 days of Yom Tov, and then they also had 2 days of Yom Tov, but the 2 days of Yom Tov was only for people that the information didn't get to. So if somebody lived in an area that the information got to, and they went to a place that the information did not get to, so essentially that would be like somebody today from Israel coming outside of Israel for Yom Tov, and everybody else keeps 2 days, and this Israeli that came, or this person back then who lived in an area that they knew the information, came to a place that they did not keep 2 days of Yom Tov, to a place that they do keep 2 days of Yom Tov. This is the Kviyas of the Yarcha. Let me just get the light here. So the rule is, we're at the top now of Nun base, and Aleph, b'yishuv le'avidna, mipnei shina machlekas. So in the yishuv, in the community itself where people live, you should not do work, mipnei shina machlekas, because the difference is going to cause a strife between the community. B'midbar, however, you're in the desert, meaning you're outside of the community. What about that? My Amalei. So he responded to him, Ravami. This is what Ravami said, B'yishuv aser. If you're in the community, you're not allowed to do work publicly, because if you do so, you're going to be acting against the community or different than the community, it's going to cause machlekes. However, b'midbar mutter, if you're in a desert, you're not so, no one else is around, then you're allowed to do work. The Gemara tells of Rav Nassim bar Asya, Azim be Rav Lepumbedisa. Rav Nassim bar Asya went from the house of Rav to, meaning from the academy of Rav, which would have been in Surah, to Pumbedisa, Biyantif, on Yantif, but it was the second day of Shavuos, Biyantif Sheni Shelatzeres. Now, he thought that he's allowed to do this, even though that it was beyond the Tchum, beyond the 2,000 Am he's allowed to travel, because the time, and because the space between was all desert, was all open land. Nobody would see him walking the distance. And even though when he arrived on the second day of Yantav, people could figure out he went, that he came from outside of the Tchum, but he didn't actually do so in front of anyone. So he thought that was allowed to be done. However, that was wrong. The halacha is that you're not allowed to do that. So Shamte Rav Yosef excommunicated him on account of publicly breaking Yantiv on the second day of Yantiv, which is the halacha. If somebody breaks the second day of Yantiv because they are diminishing the halacha, the obligation of the second day of Yantiv, that they are excommunicated. Amalei Abayis said, "V'lenagdei mar negidi." Why don't you also give him lashes? Amalei adif avdile. No, actually, excommunication is a worse punishment, and therefore I gave him I excommunicate him until he's he'll do tshuva for what he did. The B'marava, and how do I know it's worse? The B'marava mimni anegida the barbei rav v'lemimni ashamta. They in Eretz Israel they would gather for a Talmud, for a student of the academy that had done something wrong. They would gather only to excommunicate him, but the Beis Din would not gather for to give him the punishment of lashes. So you see that this is more severe. Ikeda Amri, that those that say actually it's the other way around. Nagde Rav Yosef, that Rav Yosef actually gave him lashes. Amalei Abaye Neshamte Mar, to which Abaye said, why don't you excommunicate him? Why do you give him lashes? The Rav Shmuel Damartavaye, as Rav and Shmuel both said, Menadin al Shneim Tevim Shel Goliath, that you get for somebody that doesn't keep the second day of Yantiv, that it gets excommunicated. Amalei Hanimini in Ishtalma says, yeah, that's only true for the community members. Avol Tzurbim or Rabbanim, but someone from the academy, a student of the academy, a Talmud Chacham. This person is Talmud Chacham. The Tavalei Avdi do what is more for him. Tavalei Avdi the Marava Mimni Anagadta, because in Eretz Yisrael they would gather for lashes. The Barbei Rav, for the lash of the Barbei Rav, they would of a student of the academy they would gather, but they would not gather for excommunication. So you see that's more. So there's two versions of which one is more severe of a punishment, and which one they chose to give Rav Nassim bar Asya as a punishment for publicly breaking the second day. So the Mishnah had said that similarly to not breaking the custom of the place, meaning keeping the strict your own personal customs, meaning from the place that you came, as well as the place that you went to. There are because of the minhag of the place you're going to. Similarly, this is also true for the Shemitah. Right? The Mishnah had said so too for Shemitah. Somebody brings the seventh year's produce from one place to another place that he's going to get the stringencies of both places, to which and he has to remove it from his house. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda said, go bring it from elsewhere. So we saw this a little bit. I'm just going to give a reintroduction to this idea. On the seventh year of which is a Shemitah, the Torah says that you cannot, you have to leave the field fallow. You cannot plow, you cannot harvest. However, whatever grows in the field, you and everyone else are allowed to take some. So you're allowed to bring some home as long as it is edible or is for eating for yourself and for the animals of the field. So you can take for yourself and you can take for your animals to feed them as long as the wild animals also have out in the field. So that means that as soon as there's no produce left in the field itself, at that point you have to bring in that produce and all the produce you brought in, you have to put out, and you can no longer keep it in your house. You have to put it out in a place where the animals can get to it and passersby can get to it. And then after that, the halacha is that you can bring it back in. There is a machlokas about that, but that's the way that we paskin. So you take the Shemitah produce, you bring it in. This is what had grown on its own because you're not taking care of the field, only to maintain it, but not to plow it, and not to cause new growth. And whatever you bring in is only for what you can eat. You cannot sell it, you cannot waste it, and as we'll see later, you're not even allowed to use it for fuel. You bring it in, and you can only keep it as long as it's available in the field to animals. So this person traveled from a place that the season is completely over to a place that it still exists. So in his hometown, he's not allowed to maintain this produce anymore in his house. He has to put it out. But he went to a place that there's still produce out in the field, and so he's allowed to continue eating it, and he doesn't have to do biur, which means to remove it from his property and put it out for the animals. So he doesn't have to. So he has to be strict, like the place that he was. Even though that right where he is now, it's available, but it's not available where he came from, where he brought the produce from, and so therefore he has to be strict, and vice versa as well. If where he came from, the produce is still available out in the field, but he came to visit a place that there's no produce left in the field, and so therefore he has to do biur like the locals. He has to put it out like the locals. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, just tell him to go and get the produce from the field. So the Gemara is going to try and figure out which part, what is Rabbi Yehuda disagreeing with. The Gemara says, "V'lesle Rabbi Yehuda had it tanan." Doesn't Rabbi Yehuda agree to the idea of noisten chalav chumrei makim sheyatzem misham v'chumrei makim shalach l'sham, that he has to be strict like the places that he came from and the place that he went to? Amar Rav Shisha B'rei Ravidi. So we're going to have multiple explanations or that are possible for the opinion of what's going on in the Mishnah and Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rav Shisha B'rei Ravidi miltzach ritik Amar Rabbi Yehuda. No, he's talking about something else entirely. This is what he says. What happens if in the place he came from, there is still produce out in the field, and he came to a place that there's still produce out in the field? So when he left, there was produce in the field. He came to this place, there's produce in the field. And now he hears that at home, when he left, he was still allowed to have the produce. Over here, there's still produce out in the field, but he hears that when the place he had left originally, there's no longer any produce in the field. Chayav levar. So now he has to remove it from his house, even though that over here there's produce available, but he has to remove it from his house and put it out, because where this came from originally, there is no longer produce in the field. To which Rabbi Yehuda says, so why? Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, no, you don't have to put it out, because right now you could still go bring produce from the field. And if there's produce in the field right here, so then you don't have to put it out. There's produce available for you. Right? Right now, it's not empty. The field is not empty of this produce. You can go out and harvest more, and so there's no problem with you maintaining the produce in your house. So the Gemara challenges. That means Rabbi Yehuda is being lenient. Lamemra Rabbi Yehuda lekula kamar. So you're saying Rabbi Yehuda is lenient. Ha'amar Rabbi Elazar le'amar Rabbi Yehuda ela chumra. But Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Yehuda is being strict. Ela epach. So it must be the other way around. That the first opinion said that no, he does not have to remove it from the house. Yeah, and as Rashi says here. So really, both places did not have had produce in the field when he left his home, and the place that he's currently at has produce out in the field. And the first opinion says, since even though he heard that his hometown no longer has produce, but since over here there's produce in the field, he said he has to. He does not have to, since it's produce out in the field, he doesn't have to remove the produce from his house because right here, right now, there's produce available. However, to that Rabbi Yehuda said, no, there's a problem. Since where the produce came from, there's no longer produce in the field. His hometown friends say to him, wait, go back and get more produce from where this came from, meaning you can't because there's no produce left in the field where this came from. And therefore, you have to remove it because at the source itself, there's no produce left. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and there's no produce left, and so the hometown friends tell him you need to remove it. So in the first version, the scenario is the same in these two versions. A person left his hometown while there was still produce out in the field, so he's allowed to keep his produce in his home. And he traveled to a place where there's produce in the field, and so he can keep his produce with him. Then, when then he hears that his hometown is no longer has produce. In the first version, Rabbi Yehuda says he can keep his produce. Because locally, where he is currently, there's still produce out in the field, so he can keep it. However, the second version says no. Rabbi Yehuda says that his hometown friends are the ones speaking this statement, and they say to him, "Go ahead and get the produce from the field where this originally came from," and you can't because there's no produce left there, and therefore you have to remove it. Abai says no, you don't have to change the text in any way. And this is what's going on. The scenario is really he went from a place where his hometown, the produce is still available out in the field, and he's and he came to a place that actually there's no produce left. And then, so where he went to, there's no produce out in the field, so he would have had to put the produce out for the animals. He's not allowed to keep it anymore. However, he went back home, and so he takes the produce back with him. And in his hometown, the produce is still available in the field. But he was, for a moment or for some time, he was in a place that there was no produce left anymore. The first opinion says, the produce came from a town or an area that still has produce in the field, and the place he visited was only for temporarily. He came back home, so he doesn't have to remove the produce. To which Rabbi Yehuda says, where did you come from? You came from a town. You just returned from a town that was already obligated in biur in removing the produce from the house. So then you too also have to, because that's where you came from. Go bring produce from where you came from. Obviously you can't because there's nothing left in the field over there, and therefore you have to remove it. Kollel, ask if Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi said, "What kind of?"
Can I ask a question? Could I ask a question before you get there?
Yeah.
So Are we still dealing in the question of minhag of the makom that he came from? He goes to be he has to go to chumrah, whether from the place he came from or the place he's going to, or is this a whole different set of circumstances that are based on shmitz and it could be one or the other or in between?
Well, it's similar to minhag hamakom, but it's not based on minhag hamakom. It's based on special rules
Shmitz.
of Shemitah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So it's not just the locals are going to see you do it differently, and it's going to be and it's machlokes because you're causing a
Right.
change of the minhag of the place. No, it's not based on that, but it's similar to that. But it's based on the idea of Shemitah, of whether locally the produce is available for the animals in the field, which is what the Torah bases the idea of whether you have to remove you're allowed to keep it at home or remove the product based on that. Maskif la Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi challenged the third explanation, the last one that Abaye said, Rav Yehuda, Atu agaba de chamra kaltinu. He's got produce on the back of his donkey. He's walking through an area that there's that they have they're obligated to be here already. They have to remove the produce from their house because there's nothing left in the field. That's why he now has to do the same in his hometown when he gets home. What's the logic in that? Just because he walked through someplace while the produce was on the back of a donkey? Elam Rav Ashi, rather Rav Ashi says, "Beplukta dahani tanai." The basis of the machlokas is something else entirely, and it's not even talking about a regular produce, but rather it's talking about this scenario. The Tanan we learned in the Mishnah. Somebody makes pickles, but he pickles in his pickle jars. He's got cucumbers, and he's got a few hot peppers, and he's got some onions. Okay, so he's got three different vegetables, three different products inside this pickle. So how do we look at it? Onions will be in the field longer than the cucumbers, and the cucumbers will be in the field longer than the hot peppers. So which one? When does he have to remove this and put it out? Based on the earliest, the last. How does this work? So Rabbi Eliezer, you can eat this produce since it's all mixed and it's mixed with the hot peppers, and the hot peppers are going to be out of the field. The harvest is going to end the earliest, so you can only eat this as long as hot peppers are available in the field. Once there's no longer any peppers in the field, you now have to take all these pickles with the onions and everything in it, and you have to put it out for the animals. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, it's the other way around. Whichever is latest, that's how you have to remove it. You have to remove it because you've added other products into it, so you can keep it as long as the last of these products are available in the field. Rabbi Gamliel says actually it's based on each one alone. As long as its own kind is available in the field. So as cucumbers are available in the field, so you can eat the pickle. But you can no longer keep the hot peppers in there. You have to put the hot peppers out once the hot peppers are not available in the field. When cucumbers are no longer available in the field, so you have to put the pickles out, but you can keep the onions in, etc. So kol shekol minoy min asada yivar minoy min achavis. Then he has to take out that kind from the barrel. And that is the halacha, and that's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. Go bring it from where it is. Obviously, you can't. So each product itself, you have to go and get. And so the machlokas of our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, and the Chachamim are in this machlokas that Rabbi Yehuda said, go bring that kind. Obviously, you can't bring it. So he says that it's prohibited like Rabbi Gamliel. And the first opinion who said that you restrict was the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, that you can go by the last one. Ravina says, no, the basis of the Mishnah is another machlokas. It's a different conversation. The Tanana, as we learned, now, dates, it's particular to dates, and there are other products that may be similar to this. Dates, while they're up in the tree at the top of the palm, the product will be there for a certain amount, and then they'll start falling down. However, at the bottom of the palm tree, there are these thistles and thorns that some product that fell off the tree will fall there. And it's still available to be eaten, but mostly animals won't get to it because it's hard to get to because of the thorns. So the first opinion says that the product has to be available to be eaten, not just not just in the up on the tree, but also in the sorry, it has to be up in the tree, but what's available in the thorns and thistles don't count. That you can continue eating as long as there's some dates stuck in these thorns and thistles. Sorry, let me go through this. The top part, the keepin, which is the canopy, the produce that's in the canopy, you can rely upon. But you cannot eat based on the produce that's stuck between the thorns and thistles, because the animal's not eating it, so it doesn't count as being available to the animal. So your dates, you have to remove the dates from your home, as long as once there's no longer any dates on the top in the canopy. But the fact that there are dates down at the bottom in the thorns and thistles does not count. So the first opinion of the Mishnah says that you can go ahead and continue eating the dates, even though there is in the canopy at the top of the tree, there are no dates left. But since there are some dates caught between the thorns and thistles, that's sufficient to say there's produce out in the field, and you can continue eating. And on that, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, no, since the thorns and thistles are not really available to be eaten from, so he says, that's why he says, go and get some from the field. Obviously, you can't, because you're not going to want to eat from there, or you're not going to want to try and get hurt in order to get it. So to the animals won't, and so it doesn't count as if there's animals, there's some produce available to the animals in the field. So Gemara now goes into the halachas of where we look at whether the produce is available in the field. Tanan Hasam. So we learned over there, and for this we're going to see that there are 3 areas that count as produce available or not. We don't look at the produce available in your in your 50-foot radius from your house, or even in your municipality. Rather, it goes by regions. So shalosh arasos l'bir, there are 3 regions in the land for bir, for the obligation of removing produce. Yehuda, the Judean hills, Judea, ve'ever Yarden, and the other side of the Jordan, ve'Galil, and the Galilee. And within each, there are really 3 regions that will have different times that the harvest would end. So if so, so why did we say 3 regions when really each region has its own 3 regions within it? Because the halacha is that even though, let's say in the Judean hills, the north may harvest later than the southern part of the Judean hills because it ripens later. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm saying just let's say that's the case. The people in the southern area can continue eating their produce, even though that in their locale there's no product left in the field. Since in the northern area of their region, of the Judean region, of Yehuda, there's product still in the field. Based on that product, they're allowed to continue eating. Because as Rashi explains, and the Gemara explains elsewhere, that the animals that don't find product in my field in the southern area will go and forage and look for some produce in the northern area, but they will only really be in the Judean hills. They won't go to the Galilee, and the animals of the Galilee won't come to the southern area. Amar Rav Chama Baruch Amar Rav Yosef Amar Kra, because the Torah says the produce is allowed to be for you to eat, and for your animal, your domesticated animal, and for the chaya, and for the wild animal that's in your land. As long as the wild animal can eat in the field, you're allowed to give it as produce to your animal, feed for your animal that's at home. Once it's done, the animal in the field no longer has any produce out, meaning there's nothing left in the field. You have to also do so for your animal at home, and you can no longer feed them. And meaning you have to put it out forever out of your property. That's biur. And we learn and we have a tradition, and we know that an animal in Yehuda and Judea, gedela al perish shebegol, it's not going to raise its young, or not, it's not going to forage in the north, in the Galilee, in the Galilee. And vice versa as well. The Galilean animals are not going to come into Yehuda for produce. So Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa taught that produce that went from Eretz Yisrael out to Chutz La'aretz, out to areas that there's no obligation of Shemitah. Misbarim b'chol mokem shein. So the first opinion says you have to put it out when wherever it came from, there's no longer produce in the field. However, you only have to do so in the area you are. You don't have to go back to Eretz Yisrael to remove it. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, however, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, no, you have to go back to Eretz Yisrael, to your hometown. Well, not your hometown, somewhere in Eretz Yisrael, and remove it. You have to take it back home and remove it. It says in your land. So the Gemara says, wait, but you just told me your land means that there are regions in the land. And you already used that word it taught you something already. There are two things. One, ba'aretz tells you it has to be in Eretz Yisrael. Ba'aretzecha tells you in your land, in your region. Inami, if that's the case, me asher ba'aretzecha. Inami, or perhaps it's a different one. One teaching is from Artzacha, and one is me asher ba'artzacha, from that which is in your land. Rav Safra, nothing Eretz Yisrael l'chutz la'aretz. So the Gemara tells a story that Rav Safra traveled from Eretz Yisrael outside Eretz Yisrael. And he had with him a barrel of wine that was from Shemitah produce. So the grapes of Shemitah were harvested. Typically, the year after Shemitah is when the wine would be made, and he had this wine with him. So Rav Huna b'rei Rav Ika, and he was traveling together with Rav Huna, the son of Rav Ika, and Rav Kahana, Amar Luhu, and he said to them, Ika d'shmeile minei Rabbi Abo. Did anybody hear from our teacher Rabbi Abo? Halachic Rabbi Shimon Elazar, what the halacha is? Do we have to go back to Eretz Yisrael to remove the wine, or could we just put it out and put it out here wherever we are? Amalei Rav Kahana, Hachi Amar Rabbi Abo. So Rav Kahana said, this is what Rabbi Abo said, halachic Rabbi Shimon Elazar. The halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Elazar. That's what Rav Kahana said. Amalei Rav Huna b'rei Rav Ika. Rav Huna b'rei Rav Ika said, no, that's not true. What actually, Hachi Amar Rabbi Abo. What Rabbi Abo said was this. Ein halachic Rabbi Shimon Elazar. The halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, meaning you don't have to go back to Eretz Yisrael. You can remove it. The biur, the removal of the produce that has to be done, can be done right here in wherever we are outside of Eretz Yisrael. Amar Rav Safra. So Rav Safra said, Rav Safra said, you know what? We're going to rely on Rav Huna here and be lenient and remove the produce here, and not go back to Israel to remove it. Because Rav Huna is very careful to be particular with the words of his teacher and repeat them and go back to his teacher to learn it again to make sure that he got it exact. Karachva the Pumbedisa, just like Rachva Pumbedisa would do, the Amar Rachva, as Rachva said, because he wanted to be precise in the language exactly the way his teacher said, Rachva would say, Amar of Yehuda, in the name of Yehuda, Harabayis Stiv, Kaful Ayah Stiv Lefnim Stav, that there were these platforms in front of the areas in front of the public way. On the side, there was a platform upon a platform, and these were the way the Roman markets were set. So too they had these two layers where the market was by the Beis Hamikdash, in the market in front of the Beis Hamikdash. And he would say it exactly the way his teacher said it in order to maintain the halacha, and he wouldn't change the wording to say that it was a platform. He would call it. He said it over exactly the way his teacher said. So this way you can trust it and know that it's exact. So too, Rav Huna Bereder Rav Ika is exacting in his words, and therefore we're going to rely on him. Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was not happy that he was lenient about this, and he said about him, it's great that you're doing so. Ami be'etza yishal. My nation takes advice and asks, umakla yagadle. And so the drash, the meaning of the word is etza, his wood, and makla, his stick. But his drash is he's got advice how to do it in order that he can makle as in leniency, kal. Because he wanted to be lenient, so he gave advice that we're going to follow Rav Huna and chose to be lenient. Whoever is lenient for him is what he says. Oh, that's great. So Rav Yosef was not so pleased that that Rasafra was lenient, and so he called him out on it. Rav Elai cuts kefnaisa. The last story here is Rabbi Elai cut down a young palm tree. The Shvius, it was in the Shemitah year, and he would use it and he would cut it down in order to use for firewood. So Gemara says, how can he do that? As we've said many times now, that the Torah says you can only bring the produce in la'achla to eat, and cutting down the tree is actually destroying the produce and using it for firewood, which you're not allowed to do. But you're not allowed to ruin it. And if you tell me maybe that's only when there's already produce out there, but if there's no produce, what we see that even starter of the meaning young produce, young fruits of the arla, of a tree within the first 3 years, asiri, they're prohibited in benefit, because these are the outer layer, the shell, the husk, the protector of the fruit. And this is when it's still young, obviously, because that's when it is a cover to the fruit. And nevertheless, he considers it fruit and says that it's prohibited as arla. So Rav Nachman, the Amakar of Yesi. So he's clearly following the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. The Tanan Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi says, Smodar Asav Neshu Peri. Smodar is a unripened fruit, but at a certain level that it already looks like a berry. It already looks like a grape, and the flower has fallen, and so that's when it becomes a fruit, and therefore it's going to be prohibited as arla. Because it is a fruit. And the Chachamim disagree, and they say that it's not considered arla because it's too young and it's not considered a fruit yet. And so obviously Rabbi Nachman is going to follow the opinion of who said that the reason he cut this down was because it was unripened fruit. is following this idea that the produce was not yet edible, and so it wasn't fruit, and so he was allowed to cut it down. Rav Simeon Aradai, Maskevla Rav Simeon ben Aradai, and Pliger Rabbanan later Rabbi Yossi B'Shari Lanas. That's only by grapevines, but by other trees, he doesn't say you can cut it down. But Tanam Amos saying Lanas B'Shvius, as we learned, when you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees on the Shemitah year, Beishamai and Kollel Lanas Mashiach. Beishamai says all trees once the leaves start coming out already, and Beis Hillel and Beis Hillel say, well, it depends on which fruit, but the carob trees, Hacharuvim, Mashiach Shrishu, Vagafanim, and vines, we're on top of Nun Gimel Amid Aleph now, Mashiach Griu, which is the grapes start growing a little bit, Vazesim, Mashiach Nitzu, and olives when they start sprouting. In any case, and all other trees when they start giving off some leaves. So Ravasi who boser who girua who pul alavan. Ravasi says these are all the same. Boser for grapes and girua for grapes and pul alavan, another term, a white bean. Pul alavan salkadaita, a white bean. Ela ema shira pul alavan, if it's the size of a white bean. So therefore, you're not allowed to cut down these trees. So we'll continue tomorrow with this idea. So how could he have cut down the tree that has the palm, the dates growing on it, even though they weren't ripened? We see that that counts as a fruit already at that point, and so you're not allowed to cut down the trees, as we see Bisham and Basil agree. By carob trees and grapes and olives, there may be a different time, but for sure, once it starts growing, all other trees you're not allowed to cut down.